Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today is Wednesday, June 9th, 2021, and we're going to be taking a look at 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators this past week. And some of the themes that we're talking about today are common ones that we've seen over the last few months that have been building, but some of them also are very timely and sensitive questions that we need to ask ourselves as colleges and universities and how we respond to the questions we're asking today. So before we get to those questions, I want to say, obviously, thank you to those that are joining live on Facebook every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. It's a pleasure to have your participation in these live chats. Obviously, makes for a robust conversation, and obviously very keen to get your feedback on these issues. Also, those watching on repeat, either on our YouTube channel for SMIE Consulting or watching on repeat on our Facebook page. And a special shout out to those who download us each week and make our podcast version of the Roundup part of their listening habits each week. So without further ado, let's get to the questions. And for those that are new to the Roundup, we do take all of the themes and questions we ask from the news stories we capture each week and publish in our newsletter that comes out on Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern each week. And that comes out, but it will not be coming out next week due to vacation that's happening for our family. So we'll be taking a pause on a full depth midweek roundup next Wednesday as well as a result of the vacation, but we're looking forward to being back with you on the week of the 21st. So until then, we're going to cover these 3 topics today that are all brought from our newsletter. I'm dropping the link to the most recent edition of the SMIE Consulting e-newsletter in the comments section on the Facebook page. But if you'd like to go get an archive of all the past editions as well as to subscribe to it, you can go to smieconsulting.org/subscribe, and you can enter your email address and some other relevant details to get on that subscription list. So let's get right to the questions. First up, are international students keeping their options open? We all know what a crazy last couple of years we've had in university admissions, and for students around the world that have had their dreams kind of put on hold, or maybe started their dream study degree online, have learned some lessons, frankly, in the last year. Then there's a nice university world news piece called "International Students, Are They Hedging Their Country Options?" So I'm not just talking about keeping their options open in terms of which university to go to in a particular country. It's, are they keeping their country options open, frankly? And this is something that I talk about a lot in my series on the 6 Ps of Strategic International Enrollment Management, and it's actually the first P, perspective. I've talked about this in the past, but it has a particular relevance. And when we look at an article like this, where the questions are really asked is, where should a international student that wants to study outside their home country go? If it's a very uncertain dynamic out there in terms of which countries are open, what are the regulations, health regulations that they need to fulfill to get into those countries. There's still a lot of unknowns as to what's going to happen between now and, for us in the northern hemisphere, the fall season where most of our students start each year. There's uncertainty as to what policies will be in place by then. Some institutions have already implemented vaccination policies, and we'll talk about that in our next question. But really want to focus on why it's important for universities in your messaging to students to come at it with exactly this question in mind, realizing that students over the last couple of years have become a little bit more nervous about where they're going to go because of border closures, because of travel restrictions, because of, frankly, quality of life issues that might be impacting their decision. So there are very real issues that they're confronting, and so students may have top choices that they're deciding between in the U.S., the U.K., Canada, perhaps, that they are maybe are waiting till the last minute to make the decision as to where they're going to go, because there's, frankly, too much uncertainty. And many of them who might have deferred their admission for the last year are getting to the point where, okay, it's time to really commit, because they've either decided, okay, I'm going to just do service projects this past year because I wasn't able to go to the country I wanted to start my studies, didn't want to start it online. There's a number of students that are in that situation. We already heard in the U.S., 40,000 perhaps undergraduates that had deferred enrollment, international undergrads from last fall, 2020 to this fall. So we'll see if they end up being able to come and make it to the U.S. In time. But you also have students that have gone through the process, maybe had their classmates last year that were looking to go abroad, have their study dreams changed dramatically. Many, if they were looking at Australia, New Zealand, if they still want to go there, they had to start their programs completely online. And that is still being the case for this current academic year that started in February, March for Australia and New Zealand. Students in China who wanted international students who were looking to go to China to start degrees or to return to China to continue degrees were forced to either do it online or withdraw from the institution. The greater majority of them have not been able to return either. So the article really focuses on what students have really been dealing with in terms of their decision-making process. And it's a kind of a wait-and-see approach, as the article points out, to whether they will be able to study abroad or not. And they're really learning the lessons of the past year. The kind of a quote that sums this up best is this one here in the middle of the article. While countries such as New Zealand and Australia were seen as handling the health emergency well last year, there's a growing acceptance that border closures and visa and travel restrictions mean students will probably have to study elsewhere if they want face-to-face teaching and an in-person campus experience instead of yet more online learning. And I think that's really the important lesson that we're all taking away from this, is that the whole purpose of students wanting to study outside their country is not for taking all their classes online. No student goes into that thought of studying outside their home country with that in mind. And there's a very small percentage that are happy with doing a full degree online and never actually physically getting to the college campus where they wanted to do their degree, or even going down the road of doing a full degree online with an overseas institution. There's value in the degree, but the experience, and my colleagues in the U.S., we talk about this till we're blue in the face about how important it is for international students, all students really who come to our campuses, to be engaged on campus, to experience the campus community, to learn from others in person, to develop friendships with students from all over the world, to really live that experience on campus, in the classroom, and frankly outside the classroom as well during their undergraduate experience or their whatever degree they're pursuing. So that is what I think drives students, and those that want, and survey after survey shows that international students are willing to make certain sacrifices or make certain compromises to study face-to-face. Some have already gone through extreme measures to we've heard of students in China where U.S. consulates, up until recently, where U.S. consulates were closed, were going to third countries to apply for visas, student visas that were open, to be able to come to the U.S. to continue or begin their studies. Though that's a practical reality that not everybody can pursue, and that is something that I think in the U.S. we have to be aware of what the situation is out on the ground. And we know from the NAFSA conference last week, a particular session where State Department reps were involved, made the comment that, hey, even though things might be getting better here in the United States, the situation is actually getting worse in some countries around the world. And as a result of that, access to U.S. consulates and embassies has been restricted, and they're still not fully open in all countries. In India, the second largest sending country to the U.S., they've been forced to close as a result of the incredible second wave of COVID-19 cases there, and some real tragic stories happening. And that reality on the ground in many other countries, and we take it for granted here in the U.S. because we're on the back end of it. We're getting more vaccinations out there every day, more vaccinations than we have people to take them right now. We're going to be exporting millions and millions of vaccines to other countries through different systems. So there's a real sense of perspective that we need to have in the U.S. that the rest of the world isn't at our level right now in terms of where they're dealing with COVID. And as a result, that will impact where students might be able to, are going to be able to come from this fall. So the reality is January 2022, fall 2022 are the best chances for a return to a new normal or a pre-pandemic normal in terms of student flows and a regular process of that happening. So we're not there yet, and it may be some time until we are. So I think it's fair to say that yes, international students are keeping their options open. And a part of that perspective I'm talking about here is also how well you're communicating to your prospective students, your admitted students at this point that might potentially be coming in the fall, about your policies. And this is something I'm doing with my university clients right now is, hey, how are you communicating these very important messages out to your admitted students that are looking to come this fall? How are you reassuring them of what's going to be happening on campus? Has that even gone out yet? It's a special message to your admitted students. And are you doing that in multiple ways, getting that message out in multiple ways beyond just a standard email? If that's all you're doing, even if you are having the foresight to get this kind of a message out at this point, to give your admitted students the reassurance they need to make an informed decision, and one that recognizes that the institution that they're choosing has demonstrated that they care for them, demonstrated that they want them, and understands their concerns, their needs, their fears. And that is a message that if you're just doing it in an email, that's great, but make sure you repurpose that. Have a message from your Director of International Student Scholar Services, maybe even the president of your university, talking about how important student health and safety is to them and what your institution is doing to make that happen, whether it's you're going to be able to get vaccinated once you arrive if you haven't been vaccinated already, that you're going to accept any vaccination you've gotten in your home country, even if it's not on the U.S. approved list. You're going to be able to get that you won't have to quarantine when you arrive, that unless that's part of your institution's policy, but being clear about what those steps are, because that tells the student that you get it. You understand their needs. So I hope that makes sense in terms of what we're talking about here, in terms of perspective that the students are keeping their options open. You need to be aware of that. And the perspective that you need to understand because of that, you need to be communicating more effectively with them at this point about their concerns, their issues, their needs, their fears. And if you're doing that well, and you're doing that on multiple levels, this is a chance that you can really bring in your class that you're expecting to this fall as a result of your listening skills, that you're aware that these are the issues and concerns that they have out there, that you're getting in front of it, that you're being proactive, that you are taking the lead as an institution and making sure your future students feel comfortable about making a decision to attend your institution. So are you doing that? If you are, good for you. I hope that trend continues, and this can be explored in many different levels of your relationship with your students and how you're communicating your messaging. So let's move on to question number 2. And that is, are vaccine policies making a difference for students? Now, this comes up on a lot of different levels, and we're going to focus part of our answer to this question on what's happening in India, because I think it's fairly unique and one that deserves a bit of analysis in terms of what that means for the United States. But I also want to back up a little bit and talk about the bigger picture of students, international students, admitted students, prospective students' views on vaccine passports, perhaps. And that's one potential future version of international travel that may exist out there. Some countries may adopt it, some countries won't. The U.S., several states have actually passed laws to prohibit requiring a vaccination passport requirement for access to certain services or government services. That may be countered at the federal level. So we're not sure where that's going in the United States, but that's something that in a recent survey, QS survey, that international students were asked, how do you feel about vaccine passport, having to use that, and and the university vaccine requirements. So what the results reflected, I think, is what we were talking about last time. Our students keeping in the last question, what's our students keeping their options open? They're looking to find out what those requirements are going to be, and that's again another reason to be upfront and above board with that. Like for example, the UK, Canada. Any students that might be getting in on these trial versions of reopening borders in Australia and New Zealand are going to face mandatory quarantine periods of varying lengths, up to 2 weeks, that they'll have to most likely have to pay for themselves. The U.S. does not have at present a quarantine requirement for visitors coming to the United States. There's a requirement that is required right now that students, anyone traveling to the U.S. has a negative COVID test at least 3 days before, no later than 3 days before they travel, and has one after they arrive. That is the only requirement right now that the U.S. has related to vaccines. And it's not even a vaccine requirement. So this question from QS reports is really geared towards kind of what may develop on campus in particular. And I think this is something we do want to make sure we pay attention to. This report said that 74% of respondents would consider getting a vaccine passport after they've received the vaccine, just to have it in case they need it. Conversely, 25% of respondents were unsure about implementing such a measure related to a vaccine, if their institution required a vaccine passport before they could travel to the destinations. And were unsure about that. 24% were against the proposal of if they would need a vaccine passport before they can travel to their destination. 51% of prospective international students are open to their chosen institution requiring a vaccine passport. So that's a fairly divisive issue there. So, and I think in the U.S., this is going to be, I don't think that a vaccine passport per se is going to be a requirement. What will be interesting in how institutions implement this is I understand completely why 49% are either unsure or against the proposal of requiring a vaccine passport to attend an institution in the U.S. Or in their travel destination country, because frankly, they might not be able to get a vaccination for months in their home country. And that might mean another year of waiting or another year of online classes in case they had already started that, or if they were looking to begin in-person classes right away. So vaccine policies will make a difference for those that are vaccinated versus or have access to vaccines in their country versus those that will not. And institutional policies on this, we've already seen there's almost coming up on 500 colleges now that are going to require vaccinations of students. There are many different levels of requirements. If that is very few, I think, are saying you have to have it before you can start studies. Or because what will likely happen in those cases, if that's the case, before you could start in-person studies, is more likely going to be the caveat that's attached to that. I'm assuming for colleges that would require vaccinations. You're also going to have those students that simply haven't been able to get a vaccination before they leave their home countries, that when they get to the U.S., well, if that's a requirement at your college, you need to be, if that's going to be something they need to know before they leave home, you better be sure you're telling them now. Because you know what the ones that we have in the U.S., aside from Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer and Moderna, you're taking those two, Pfizer or Moderna, you have a 3-week gap, a minimum, between the Pfizer shots that you have to wait after you get your first, before you can take your second, and then 2 weeks after that before you're considered fully immunized. So we're talking a minimum 5 Well, let's see, 5 weeks. If you were getting a vaccination today in the U.S. with Pfizer, a minimum of 5 weeks before you be fully vaccinated, considered fully vaccinated, 6 weeks if you're getting the Moderna. Johnson & Johnson, one shot, but perhaps less protective in the long run than the Pfizer Moderna double shots. So we'll see what that means for students overseas that are not able to get a vaccine before they come, and if that's going to be a requirement at your college, what are the steps going to be for them? Will they have to quarantine, or will they have to do their degrees or begin their degree studies online until they've had the vaccine and had the mandatory period of time necessary to become fully vaccinated? And does that mean that during that time they can't have full access to the campus, or they have to wear masks all the time? Because there's a lot of caveats to how these rules are going to be implemented that I don't know how well thought out institution policies have been on this front. So there's also been the question of, can you require vaccination that's only approved for emergency purposes only? And right now, all of the 3 vaccines approved in the U.S. are emergency use only. I think Moderna is applied for the full regular use for their vaccine, but that takes time for the FDA to approve. The other versions that are out there, here's the other question that we talked about before, is what if a student is able to get a vaccination in their home country, but it's not one of the 3 U.S. versions that are approved? Does your campus policy have flexibility enough to allow, say, if it's on the WHO list, if it's one of those approved, then they'll be able to start their studies? If it's not on the WHO list, what if it's one of the countries that have their own versions of the vaccine that aren't on a WHO or a FDA list? There's a number of those out there. There's only 8 on the WHO list right now. 3 of those are also approved in the U.S. There's one of the 2 China vaccines. Sinopharm is on it. Sinovac is waiting for approval. There are others that are out there. Sputnik, the Russian version, isn't on the WHO list. So what is your campus doing with those? If you have a WHO policy threshold for vaccines, what is your campus doing to accommodate international students? I mean, what I think the enlightened colleges and ones that are certainly thinking about this in practical terms, where a student isn't able to get a vaccine in their home country, allow them access to it once they get to campus and have clinics, perhaps. Some colleges are doing that. Certainly forward-thinking ones are doing that and arranging that. May have already been doing that over the course of the spring semester on campus, having those clinics and making vaccines available for faculty and staff and students. That kind of thing would make a lot of sense for your new students, particularly if they haven't had the shots yet, if you're going to require them on campus. It's the challenges in the U.S. These vaccination debates are obviously getting highly politicized, and it's causing some challenges in some states, like we talked about with Indiana. The state prohibited public institutions from requiring a vaccination. Documentation of a vaccination before a student could start studies, but the institutions could still require that students be vaccinated, but just not require documentation. So there's some interesting loopholes out there that institutions are going to have to navigate and set up to allow their policies to be fully implemented, or end up changing their policies. So this is something that's really interesting. But on the back side of this, I do want to share a couple of articles from 3 articles from India that relate to the Indian demographic. And that's important because India's vaccination rates are still fairly low, under 10%, I think. But what we're seeing is Indian students certainly are very keen to study abroad in 2021 because they haven't been able to go in the numbers that they normally do every year. And other markets in Australia have certainly been reduced. New Zealand have been reduced to them. Canada has been reduced to them because of travel restrictions, because of border closures, all of that. But one of the reasons in a Knowledge Review article that features the results of a survey performed by Leverage Edu, a global consultancy platform. 94% of Indian students want to study abroad. 94% more Indian students want to study abroad this year than the previous year. And interestingly, one of the most common reasons given by students for wanting to study abroad is the availability of better health care. And they consider the UK, US, and Canada have superior early access to vaccines, healthcare facilities, and air quality. So that's what's driving some Indian students to study abroad, healthcare, and you normally wouldn't probably see that as the major driver. What you're also seeing in India, and this I haven't seen for many other countries yet, there's a couple of articles I'll be posting the links to, one from the Hindu and one from Business Standard, that talk about in India people going abroad Indians who are looking to go abroad, including for study and jobs, are going to be given priority access to one of the Indian vaccines, Covishield. And that's interesting. This Covishield, it's not on the WHO list either. So it's an interesting one that they're going to get priority for access to this at an interdose interval of 4 to 6 weeks. So they have a longer gap between doses, 4 to 6 weeks for the Covishield vaccine. So that is, and it's the regulation is, or the article says that students and individuals who are going abroad for higher studies or jobs and for whom COVID-19 vaccination certificate is required will be given Covishield. But the challenge is if it's required that they be vaccinated, but the challenge is if the vaccine that they're getting isn't one that is actually going to be acceptable. That's a whole other level of questions that we talked about earlier. That is certainly something that, interestingly, that the government in India is saying that this is now a priority, that if you're going abroad for studies or work and it's required that you have a vaccine, you'll get one you have priority access to these vaccines. So interesting to see that. And I think students are certainly, based on admission letters, will have priority access to that. If those admission letters require vaccinations, then certainly that's going to be interesting to see. And it does make the point that it's not entirely true, since it says since COVID vaccination is going to be a key condition for travel and stay in countries like the United States, Canada, Australia, and Europe. We can say, obviously, in the U.S., that's not yet a requirement, and certainly not a travel requirement to be here. It may be for individual colleges that they go to, but certainly not for the travel piece right now. So we'll see where that goes in the future. But I wanted to make sure we covered that today as just explaining how important vaccinations are going to be in terms of your institution's policy and where you are moving forward. And the final question of the day. How is your college handling the cancellation of national exams? This exams have obviously taken huge hits. These standardized tests that we talk about, SAT and ACT tests that have been canceled, TOEFL, IELTS tests that have been canceled. But one of the things that for institutions of higher learning or higher education that is essential or has been essential, bedrock for many institutions in making decisions or confirming admissions decisions that have been made are the receipt of final national exam results. Most countries around the world have some version of this, whether it's A-levels in England, whether it's Abitur in Germany, whether it's French Bac, whether it's the IB exams, which are worldwide as well, that have been canceled in many countries. You also have these national exams in India, Pakistan, Nepal, that have been canceled. In India and Nepal, for certain, have been canceled already for the second year in a row. These national exams that in the past are what students use to get in to certain universities. Certainly over the summer period, these national exams that are taken in June are, when those results become available for British university entrance requirements, the clearing process that happens over the summer for entry into British universities, that is thrown up in the air now. These exams have been, and they're being canceled because of this second, third, fourth wave of COVID-19 cases that are hitting the South Asian region. And you see on Twitter, you saw the hashtag cancel all exams was trending at the end of May, and that continued into June. That the exams were initially were postponed from June to July and August in India, but then last week we saw the word come down that those national exams have been canceled, the CBSEs. So this is a real challenge for institutions, and we saw and posted about it in our newsletter last week. University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, made the decision before the cancellations happened that they would need the final results by August 1st in order for those students to start studies at the end of August at Champaign-Urbana. So for those students, that's obviously, this is at a time when the exam dates had just been moved to July and August, and so they wouldn't have those final results to get to the University of Illinois by August 1st. And as a result, I'm sure the institution will now make exceptions, but the message that they sent out was fairly tone deaf in that respect, in terms of not understanding, hey, these students don't have any choice in the matter. It's not like they didn't want to take their exams. They couldn't. They were delayed, and now they've been canceled. So what is your institution policy going to be on that? I mean, for us in the U.S., we always talk in admission circles about the importance of not necessarily just the tests, that they're one piece of a puzzle, all of that, but we talk about the importance of your academic performance all the way through secondary school and the grade mark sheets that students get every year. But the challenge is there isn't the real priority placed on those mark sheets on the year-to-year grades in many of the countries that we want to recruit in. So as a result, we've had to wait and weigh more heavily these final exams. Some countries it's very difficult to get those mark sheets, but you need them to make an informed decision. But now without those end-of-year exams, those standard 12s, those CBSE exams, what are you doing in countries like India, Pakistan, Nepal, that have canceled their national exams? We saw the Gaokao canceled last year. I think they have been able to do it this year, or are planning to do it this month for Chinese students. So what are you doing? How flexible is your institutional policy on this respect? If you've already admitted a student for the fall, and normally you'd need them to present their exam results in order to begin studies formally with you, but maybe they're never going to be able to take those exams now. So what's that policy going to be for you, for your institution? So I think it's worth talking about, and again, messaging out to your prospective students. Hey, we understand there's some issues with your exams. Here's what we're planning to do at our institution. So get that message out now. Be upfront about it. We're looking into the issue. We'll get back to you as soon as we have a response, even if you don't have one right now. Keep the lines of communication open, because it matters. These students fear the unknown, and when you're silent on matters, they're expecting the worst. So you really need to get out front of these issues, and this is a perfect 2 examples today of why you want to be over communicating these important details that are outside your normal communication flow. And this is something that you need to be flexible about in terms of how you adapt. So certainly something I'm talking about with my clients on that I'm regularly working with, and on how important these kinds of messages are. So that's what we have for you this week on the Roundup. We appreciate you being a part of the community, and we look forward to chatting with you in the coming weeks and months. And again, just a reminder, no formal Roundup next Wednesday on the 16th due to vacation, and no newsletter coming out either. So we will be back with you on the 23rd for our next formal midweek Roundup, and hopefully be also putting out the newsletter that week as well. So until next time, have a great week. Cheers.